Hey folks, Oscar here. Some of you might remember a few years ago, I was asked to be on the episode 3 guys, Matt Dalglish and Andrew Whitelaw, on their podcast. And we were talking about a new piece of legislative proposals from the Australian Treasury. And it was this Scope 3 mandatory emissions reporting. Now, for those of you who saw it all on Twitter, you probably saw the discussions. There were a lot of comments like, this is environmentalism gone mad, the communists and the greenies are taking over. And yeah, well, the first time mandatory ESG reporting is brought in, it's going to get some contention, and rightly so. Because the reality of the situation was, no matter what your views on climate change or agriculture's sustainability, the fact of the matter is this thing was a bureaucratic cost burden for farmers, okay? It was going to cost us all a lot of money and a lot of time to meet these new requirements. So what were they? So on an individual farm, your diesel, your fertilizer, your chemical use was all going to have to be accounted for. And then if you sold a single grain, a single road train worth of production to any of these larger entities that are caught up in this regulatory reporting requirement, then those entities were going to have to ask you for all of your farm production data. So probably a couple of years worth of every single thing that you've done on your farm, that would come with it. That would give them a huge amount of financial data, as well as the production IP that you've got on your farm. All of that was going to have to be handed over every single time you did a transaction with one of these big companies. What's new to me, I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball, was the fact that NFF, having taken a position that this wasn't the right way to go, have managed to have a big win. And they've had a win at a time when the federal government was committed to this. It was actually an election issue. For those of you who remember, I did a video for NFF on this at the time. During the election, we had the contrast between the LNP, who were talking about dropping Scope 3 emissions reporting, which was good. But we also had the ALP position, which was absolutely, they were going to go ahead with Scope 3 emissions reporting being mandatory, right? When the ALP won that election, a lot of us were pretty pessimistic about the chances of getting some major wins here. But to their credit, the team at National Farmers Federation, I think in particular Warwick Ragg, the member of staff who's responsible for it, Angus Atkinson, who chairs the relevant committee, but a whole bunch of other farmer groups as well got involved and worked with it, the state farmer organisations, the peak bodies, got in and said, nah, you don't need to do it. There's a better way that you can achieve this win. Convincing government departments and ministers that it was possible to achieve their policy objectives as per the election in a way that wasn't going to cause thousands of dollars of extra cost on every individual farmer and force us to hand over all of our production data every single time we did a transaction. NFF has done a really good thing here. Now, a lot of you, I still get calls about people going, explain all this to me. So, this is a good example of building the ark before the rain begins. NFF knew this legislation was coming in. They knew governments were going to be working on ways to adopt it, that would create new standards or protocols. And so NFF have accepted the government's policy position and said, yep, you guys are bringing in mandatory Scope 3 emissions, and after the resounding election win by the ALP, it's pretty clear we're not going to be able to beat you there. What we can do, though, is offer you better ways of doing it. So before it became a huge problem, because trust me, if NFF hadn't done this work, in 2 or 3 years' time, every single farmer in Australia would be having a bitch at the local pub saying, crikey, I've just had to spend 4 days in the office doing my fucking emissions reporting reports. It would have cost you many days. It would have cost you potentially getting professionals in. You would have had to subscribe to software. It was a large cost and it was coming. But NFF acted before that bottom line impact and that cost impact and that burden fell on farmers. They managed to talk to government before the introduction of these laws became widespread. And so instead of being really worried about what was about to happen on 1 July 2026, instead, we know we've had a pretty good reprieve. So acting before it becomes a shit fight, by having policy analysts who know what's going on, who are able to anticipate the moves of government and provide better solutions without having an argy-bargy fight, that's what NFF's done. And that's what they've managed to achieve, is a big win. So, climate-related financial disclosures. I won't go through the details. Everyone probably needs to know this themselves. Go and look at the Department of Ag, Google search that, climate-related financial disclosures from the Federal Department of Agriculture. You will find a fact sheet. Go through that fact sheet. It shows exactly what we'll be able to do. Industry averaging is an acceptable format for those companies that are forced to do the reporting. So most individual farmers won't. Only the very largest farms will have to do individual reporting. The individual farmers who have business relationships and supply the companies that are dragged into mandatory Scope 3 emissions reporting, individual farmers will be able to push back and say, nope, just use an industry average. You don't need my individual data. It's a really big win. Now, I should just say the battle's not over, because even though industry averaging or secondary data sources is permitted under this new ruling, we still have an ACCC or a competition issues, because some companies will want your full production data. Some individual buyers of your production, in whatever industry you're in, will still say, nah, we want everything. We want to see everything that you're doing. This does not solve that. So that's the real battle going ahead, is farmers and farmer groups are going to have to work out how we get ACCC determinations on this. We need to work out if we're going to do collective bargaining, which we're allowed to do now, and we often don't. But potentially individual state farmer organisations could run a collective bargaining service for their members and be able to push back on those individual companies and say, no, you don't need all of our full production data to be reported in this particular format. You can go and use an industry average. Or if you are going to use our farmer members' individual data, then we need to see a discrete premium or a payment for that. So if you want it, you got to pay for it to help share the costs of that reporting burden. But yeah, the battle's not over, but we should celebrate what's a really good win. And like I said, I'm a little bit late to the party. This went live on a website last month. So, check it out. Look up the Department of Ag climate-related financial disclosures fact sheet. Understand what it means, and continue the conversation with your state farmer orgs and your peak bodies, because like I said, they're the ones who now need to step up and look at those competition laws. But enjoy the win, folks. We don't often see this, and it's a great example of acting before the problems are set in stone, before the laws are locked in, and before farmers everywhere are complaining and it's the front page of the Land and the Queensland Country Life. NFF have acted before all of those problems happened in our businesses and on the ground, and they were able to steer this away so that industry averages can now be used, or secondary data, and individual farmers don't necessarily have to do this huge amount of burden of paperwork and costs of reporting emissions. So it's a big win, and it's a sign that NFF can, when they do things well, really get a win on behalf of every single farmer in this country, and that the SFOs, likewise, aren't doing such a bad job, guys. This win will save most farmers hundreds or thousands of dollars a year, and I've got to say, we're lucky to have the NFF doing their work and doing the advocacy that's got this result. So yeah, check it out. The Department of Ag's climate-related financial disclosures fact sheet. Have a read of it, and yeah, have a toast to NFF for a job well done.